This is apropos. Well, the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees says its clinics remain open across the occupied West Bank and that its work continues in Gaza despite being ordered to cease operations by Israel. The ban passed by the Israeli parliament last October came into effect at midnight despite a heavy diplomatic backlash. Providing aid to 2.5 million Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank, UNRWA has been the main lifeline for a population reliant on humanitarian aid. Nick Rushworth has the latest.
Israel has cut ties with UNRWA, the UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian Refugees, accusing it of providing cover for Hamas militants. The agency from this Thursday is banned from operating on Israeli soil. Contact between it and Israeli officials is forbidden. A spokesperson for the Israeli Foreign Ministry said on social media,
"Humanitarian aid doesn't equal UNRWA, and UNRWA doesn't equal humanitarian aid. UNRWA equals an organisation infested with Hamas terror activity. This is why beginning on January the 30th, and in accordance with Israeli law, Israel will have no contact with UNRWA."
The decision comes into effect following a ban passed in the Knesset last October and a decision by Israel's Supreme Court on Wednesday to reject a petition from a rights group contesting the move. The UN says its aid agency will continue to work in all Palestinian territories. An UNRWA official speaking before the ban came into effect warned of the devastating impact it could have.
We're responsible for over half of deliveries inside the Gaza Strip, over half of the aid coming in. The UNRWA, has been described repeatedly, not by ourselves, but by others, as the backbone of the international aid operation. Without UNRWA being able to operate, there's a very real risk of the humanitarian operation collapsing.
After the Hamas-led attack on Israel on the 7th of October 2023, Israeli officials accused around a dozen of the agency's 13,000 staff in Gaza of taking part. A series of investigations found some neutrality-related issues, but stressed Israel had not provided evidence for its headline allegation.
To discuss, we're joined now by Omar Shakir, Israel and Palestine Director at Human Rights Watch. Omar, thanks so much for being with us on the programme. The UN agency was aware that this ban was coming. It formally took effect at midnight. What impact is it having on the ground, if any yet, and is aid still being delivered?
So the immediate implications have largely been focused on occupied East Jerusalem. UNRWA has a headquarters there. They also have health clinics and other offices that provide essential services to Palestinians. Israeli authorities have told UNRWA to vacate those premises and are likely facing an imminent situation in which action will be taken to block access to Palestinians. There are thousands, tens of thousands of registered Palestinian refugees in occupied East Jerusalem. Also, UNRWA provides services in areas that are on the other side, the West Bank side of the separation barrier, that are frequented by Palestinians in refugee camps in the West Bank. So that obviously has already been affected. And, this hangs over the entire organization, which, there are, millions of Palestinian refugees across the region in the West Bank and Gaza that rely on UNRWA services, including in Gaza, as you noted in your program, where humanitarian aid is coming. And we don't know yet exactly how the Israeli authorities will act. Will they allow that aid to continue? Will they allow UNRWA staff to be able to work from Gaza, the staff that requires passports and visas? These are questions that are not yet clear in the hours since this law has come into effect. But, it's very clear the Israeli government seeks to dismantle UNRWA, and that could have dramatic implications, already some of which we're seeing, but more that could be coming in the days ahead.
And Omar, as well, it's coming at a sensitive time, just weeks into the ceasefire in Gaza. Where does this leave all those people who are reliant on humanitarian assistance? We saw in that report as well, apart from the humanitarian aspect, many of these people view the agency as a symbol of their identity. It goes as far as that.
Absolutely. It's very clear the Israeli government here, their campaign is much larger, and it started way before October 7th. This is about liquidating the status and the legitimate rights of Palestinian refugees. Look, Palestinian refugees would today give up their status as refugees if they were given their recognized right to return to their homes that they were expelled from in 1948. That's why UNRWA were created. But obviously, that's not the current reality where they're able to return given the Israeli government's intransigence. And so this UNRWA is there to provide basic services in the meantime. And you're right. I mean, in Gaza, UNRWA has been essential for health, for education, far before October 7th. So for Palestinians, it's not only about aid. And even since the ceasefire has come into effect, UNRWA has been providing trucks of aid into northern Gaza, a population that has faced months of the Israeli government using starvation as a weapon of war, deliberately depriving Palestinians of water, of food, of electricity, of basic services. And UNRWA has been one of the agency best positioned to serve them. So to answer your question, UNRWA is essential, not just given the dire humanitarian situation we face right now, but much more broadly as providing services. And it's entrenched in the foundation of the international refugee law that UNRWA exists. And when they don't exist, other UN agencies are also there in other areas to provide services. So I think it's really essential, particularly given the current situation in Gaza, that the international community make clear to Israel that it will not allow Israel to kill off UNRWA and to strip Palestinian refugees of their rights and status under the law.
And NGOs are also warning this could have an impact on regional stability. Would you agree?
I mean, absolutely. I mean, look, we're looking at a reality in the West Bank, in Gaza, right, where you have Gaza, the majority of the population are refugees who rely on UNRWA services. I mean, who's going to fill the gap in providing education and providing health services? I mean, right now in Gaza, obviously, the entire population has been deprived of those things. But in the West Bank, in Jordan, in Syria, in Lebanon, UNRWA provides those services. And if UNRWA doesn't exist, you create a vacuum because you have millions, in some cases, hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands of Palestinian refugees. By the way, by generation. I mean, they've been refugees in many cases for decades, who are not going to have any infrastructure to receive support for those services. So certainly beyond just putting Palestinian lives at risk, education, health, other basic rights, it certainly could have wider destabilizing effects, particularly in the context in the West Bank, where we're seeing the Israeli government, as we speak, carrying out attacks in Jenin refugee camp and elsewhere in the West Bank, and where refugees in Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, in many cases are facing very difficult economic and other situations.
And Omar, you asked the question yourself, but who will fill the gap? There are reports as well that American contractors, for example, are being hired to run checkpoints in Gaza.
Look, I mean, the humanitarian community has been crystal clear, that UNRWA is essential and that they need to operate. There is no other agency that can fill the gap. So I think the focus of the international community right now must be to make clear to the Israeli government that it will not allow it to dismantle UNRWA, that UNRWA is essential in providing these services, and that they continue to put pressure on the Israeli government to allow it to operate. Obviously, there are other UN agencies, there are other institutions that provide critical services. They should be supported as well, but there simply is no real credible alternative to UNRWA, and the world needs to make that clear to the Israeli government. Ultimately, this isn't just about the well-being of Palestinians. The Israeli government itself, it's obligated as the occupying power to provide these services to the occupied population. It's not doing so. So ultimately, if UNRWA is not doing so, the obligation comes back to Israel to ensure that their rights and their needs are accounted for. And obviously, they have a very long track record of not just not doing that, but of fundamentally undermining the rights of Palestinians and repressing them.
And Omar, as we say, we've known that this ban is coming since October. Some have criticised UNRWA's leadership for its handling of all of this, saying that there's been no clear path out of, or in terms of handling what's actually happening. Is that something that you would agree with, or what would your view be there?
Not at all. I mean, the UNRWA is established by virtue of international law. It's set out in UN resolutions. It has a mandate. It is, an essential agency. It's not going to let any government, simply kill off an organ of the UN. I mean, that. What kind of precedent would that set? So I think they have been rallying states to fill the gap, to put pressure on there, and as they should be doing, because ultimately, no country should have the veto power to just simply erase and undo an international institution, international law. And so I think that's really misplaced here. No agency is going to fold because a repressive government tells it can't service the communities it has the legal obligation to serve. That's ridiculous here. The ultimate fault here lies with the Israeli government for its unlawful campaign to deprive Palestinians of aid, of resources. And a part of that strategy, of course, is is attempting to undermine and even more dismantle UNRWA.
And in terms of precedent, as you mentioned there, what are the wider implications when a UN member state bans a UN agency?
Well, I think you're hitting the nail on the head. I mean, this affects protection of civilians and refugees worldwide. I mean, you have these institutions provide services far beyond the occupied Palestinian territory. I mean, obviously, UNRWA has a unique mandate, but there are sister organizations that service other refugee communities. There are UN bodies that provide food aid, health services, really basic things. And if the Israeli government is allowed, and that's precisely why the International Court of Justice was asked by the UN General Assembly to issue an opinion about the implications of this decision, because they really could affect crisis response, civilian protection, refugee protection, and areas of armed conflict around the world. So even if states may not particularly put a focus on the situation in the occupied Palestinian territory, they should care and push back here because of the precedent it could set in the way in which it could undermine the UN, international organizations more broadly, from working in situations of armed conflict around the world.
And Omar, Israel, of course, claims that the agency is deeply infiltrated by Hamas. Is there any evidence at all to back this up?
Look, I think the Israeli government's claims have been pretty well, debunked, over time. All along, we're talking about just a small handful, of individuals and organizations that employs tens of thousands, of people. And there have been, reporting that has shown that, that not only have these claims been overstated, but the UN has itself investigated. It has actually fired employees for which they found credible evidence, of wrongdoing. But to basically hold an entire, not just agency, but a Palestinian refugee community that had nothing to do with the allegations against a small number of employees, that's akin to collective punishment. That is, jeopardizing the rights, the needs of hundreds of thousands, millions of people because of potential wrongdoing of a handful of people, which again the UN took seriously from the beginning and dismissed those for which there were accusations against them. So I think this has really been clear. It's been transparent all along. It's never been about these allegations. This is about a long-standing Israeli government campaign to liquidate the rights of Palestinian refugees, and simply they failed. The world, is not going to simply erase decades of law and precedent, because an abusive government doesn't like it.
Omar, we'll have to leave it there, but thank you so much for joining us. That's Omar Shakir, Israel and Palestine Director at Human Rights Watch. Well, that's it from us for now. Do stay with us, though. We'll be back shortly.